thing. And for all intents and purposes, Dexa is the gold standard. And we've talked about what that is, so I'm not going to go into it, but basically it's a type of X-ray that scans your body that effectively divides tissue into the following buckets very accurately: bone, fat, other. So the other is mostly muscle, but of course it's also your organs and things like that. So we look at DEXAs in a number of ways. It's very good at giving total body fat because it's very accurate at measuring fat. So total body fat divided by total body weight is your body fat percentage. And as we've talked about, that's the thing that most people care about when they get a DEXA scan. When our patients get DEXA scans, and we are really adamant that our patients get DEXA scans at least once a year. I think this is a very important thing to be doing. When I run through the results with them, I always say the same thing. Of the 4 things we're going to talk about today, the least interesting of these is your body fat. The 3 other things that we talk about are your visceral fat, which is one of the compartments of fat that is outside of the subcutaneous stores. That's the areas where we want to store fat. If we're going to put excess energy away, we want it to be in subcutaneous pockets of fat. As our capacity to store fat there gets stretched, we begin to spill over into other places. We talk about this, and I write about this in the book, as the bathtub. So everybody has sort of a different size bathtub. That's their genetic capacity to store fat in the safe subcutaneous space. The water coming in the bathtub is what you're eating. The water leaving the bathtub through the drain is the energy expenditure. You will either be net accumulating or net losing water in that bathtub. But if you get to the point where you exceed your bathtub's capacity to hold water and you start to spill over, really bad things happen. Nobody likes to have even a small amount of water on their floors and, God forbid, in their drains and heating ducts. And that's what's basically happening when you start to see visceral fat, when you start to see intrahepatic fat. NAFLD is the earliest stage of that. When you start to see peripancreatic fat, perinephric fat, pericardial fat, all of these things are really problematic, highly inflammatory, and effectively what I would call the 4th pillar of disease. So, for example, if you're talking about ASCVD, we talk a lot about ApoB, blood pressure, smoking. We don't want to forget the inflammatory effect of those fat sources. So that becomes the second thing we care a lot about. Third thing we care a lot about is bone mineral density. So we care about a person's Z-scores and T-scores. Recall from the podcast we did on that, the Z-score is your age, sex matched BMD for your lumbar spine and your hips. The T-score is comparing you to a 30-year-old. We use the T-score to make the diagnosis of osteopenia, if that's 1 standard deviation below the mean, or osteoporosis if you're, I believe, 2.5 standard deviations below the mean. The 4th thing we look at are the metrics, the 2 metrics of muscle mass, which are ALMI and FFMI, appendicular lean mass index, and fat-free mass index. These are 2 different methods to triangulate on the same sort of thing, which is basically how much muscle mass do you have for your height. So the ALMI is calculated by looking at the lean mass in your arms and legs in kilograms, dividing that by your height in meters squared. The FFMI takes the total fat-free mass in your body and divides that by your height in meters squared. Obviously, FFMI is a much bigger number than ALMI. The absolute numbers aren't what matters. What matters is where you show up on the nomogram for your age and your sex. And we want our patients to be north of the 75th percentile for ALMI and FFMI based on the data we've shared previously. Okay, so with all that said, I have kept a spreadsheet for, better part of 12 years where I log my DEXA data. And I think, it'd be interesting to go through some of that now. So